Fools for Thought.
Hello, good day. Welcome to the 6th episode of Fools for Thought. In this show, we take a look at everyday topics with a little humor and just a bit of sarcasm. Today's show is going to revolve around a preview of the 2016 elections. Alex, are you ready for this?
I'm never ready for an election year, Steve, but this one I probably dread more than most years.
Dread more than most? Why do you say that?
It seems to me to be a repeat of all previous elections that we've had, all mashed together. So, like, all the worst things that you can imagine put into this year's.
Yeah, I looked back at some of our previous presidents, and sadly, for the last, I think it was 26 years or something like that, we've had something like 3 different last names. That's it. I do have a confession to make.
Yes.
Several years ago, I used to be a political junkie to the point where I would have presidential debate parties.
Where people would come over and debate about presidents?
No, where we would schedule get-togethers around the nationally televised presidential debates. We would come over, we would make some popcorn or drink some beer or something, whatever, and just have a good old time listening to these stooges spout off about things that they know very little about.
Well, it's really all sanitary, too. I'm not even sure how much hilarity you can have at that when every measure that is so well practiced and, it's made to be the most unoffensive, mild, broadest spectrum opinion you can possibly have. And then when they get in office, they do something completely different, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about these guys, and I know you will, but the ability to debate and talk in such a way where you never really commit to anything, you never say yes or no, it's actually pretty amazing how well rehearsed these guys actually are. So first, we will talk about a 2016 preview. We will then dive into a little bit more of a lighthearted subject in 5-Minute Finance. We're going to give you a scenario. You just came into a bit of money. Maybe you got an unexpected raise at work or a bonus. Say it's $10,000. What do you do with it? There are so many ways that you can spend or save that money. What do you do? What is best for that cash, depending on the situation that you're in? We will talk about that for a few minutes, and we will end with another discussion about politics. What if there were no political parties? What would that do to our landscape? How would that change things? How would that change our election process? And what would that do to us when we are in the voting booths every 4 years voting for these guys? What if they just didn't have a R or a D or an L at the end of their names? Where do we go? What do we do? How do we know who we're going to vote for? So those are our topics for today. Let's dive right into a preview of 2016. We've already done a little bit of that. There are several candidates in the running. From the Democratic side, of course, we have Hillary Rodham Clinton. She has not officially entered the race yet. It's a little bit too early for that. We have Martin O'Malley. We have Jim Webb. We have even Joe Biden, but I don't think he will run. I think he stuck his foot in his mouth a little bit too many times to be taken seriously as a presidential candidate for the Democrats. Over to the Republicans, we actually have a few more contenders. Believe it or not, another Bush, Jeb Bush, is actively exploring a presidential run. We have Scott Walker, Wisconsin governor. We have New Jersey governor Chris Christie. We have former Arkansas governor Mike Huckabee again, who of course failed the first time. Marco Rubio, who seems to be increasingly gaining ground. We also have Rand Paul, who is the son of Congressman Ron Paul. We all know who Ron Paul is and his more libertarian-minded republicanism. And his son, I think, is trying to. He's trying to follow in his dad's footsteps to some degree, but quite frankly, I don't think he's there yet. I don't think he really knows what he stands for. We also have Ted Cruz and Rick Santorum. So there are a bunch of contenders for 2016. So where do we go? What do we make of all this? Alex, what's your take on how this widespread political landscape is shaping up for 2016?
We're seeing kind of what happened when the end of 2008, when George Bush was, leaving the presidency, and there wasn't a clear Republican contender that would rise to replace him. And same thing with this now election is that, previously used to have the vice president run. So if you want to go all the way back to the Clinton eras in 2000, Al Gore ran after Bill Clinton was out of office, and then before him, when Reagan, George Bush the first, ran. And he was the vice president for Reagan for those many years. So he ran, of course, in 1988 and won to 1992, where he lost to Clinton. And before that, we have a history of that, actually, where the vice president typically will run to carry it on. The odds of success are kind of minimal because I believe even people that are happy with the current situation, they don't like to see one party remain in power too long, even if they're part of that party. A lot of independents change, their mind. But now I think we're getting away from that. We're now going into the super rock stardom. We're looking for rock stars. We're looking for people who can break out and go beyond. And I do think that's how George Bush, number two, actually got into office to begin with, because he wasn't the clear choice in terms of longevity, in terms of experience, in terms of stuff. At that time, it really was other people, especially John McCain from Arizona. He had an enormous amount of military cred because he was a POW. He fought in war. He had a huge record of dealing with defense and intelligence-related issues by being on Senate subcommittees. He had done a lot of work actually going outside the country and acting as a representative of the United States. So by far, he was much more qualified. But he wasn't sexier than George Bush, if you know what I mean. He didn't have that young flair coming into the office and rock starring it, And then we really saw that cranked up with, how Obama just shot right past Hillary Clinton come in the 2008 presidential nominations. He knows how to talk. He's very articulate. You could even say that even Bill Clinton started this when he Slick Willie, when he come out and play jazz on stage on a saxophone and appear. So despite the fact, I mean, in all respects, George Bush Sr. was incredibly more qualified to be in the office of the presidency. I mean, he had fought a war on his own. He had seen all the policies of Reagan. He'd been involved in that whole setup, and a lot of his policies, were very moderate. And I think that's coming off of being on such a weird time in the 80s when you had Reagan, who was a conservative, yet who spent like a liberal, but, was conservative. It was really weird. And so he had a lot of experience, but he wasn't sexier than the young 42-year-old Bill Clinton at the time. You're seeing that again, and I think you're really, really, really seeing it in the Republican Party. Jeb Bush is much more qualified speaking. Scott Walker's a lot more qualified at speaking than most of his contenders at his party. You're seeing people like Huckabee and Rick Perry and stuff like that start to fade away. Ted Cruz is just plain crazy when he talks, so he's not going to go anywhere. Mark Rubio is a young star. Again, he's got that fire behind him when he talks, and he's very articulate, and he's young, and he's been rising in the ranks of popularity. He wasn't even considered a contender a year ago. Chris Christie, is kind of the more sensible choice of a lot of these because he's been on both sides. He's been in a purple state, obviously a Republican governor of a blue state. He's dealt with very bad national crises before and come out the other side clean. He's done a lot of reforming in the state.
You were talking about who the sexiest candidate is. Chris Christie, this may seem like a superficial question, but what do you think Chris Christie's weight? I mean, how does that impact his chances of winning the 2016 primaries, much less the election?
Oh, yeah, he's not going to win it. The fact is people want to see people that are fit and attractive, and regardless of not if that actually has any bearing to do on their job, Americans like to be, I think in a lot of ways, secretly bigoted and secretly sexist, but they feel okay about it when it's against someone that can quote-unquote control something. If people feel that they're born that way and they can't do anything about it, that's fine, then they won't be that way. But if it's somebody who is overweight, then it's like, oh, well, you're fat and you don't run on a treadmill, and then they'll bring out all that to bear on them.
Sure. Well, then you have Rand Paul, who's very skinny.
Rand Paul is a good speaker. He's probably a better speaker than his father, to be completely honest with you. His father, of course, was trained as a medical doctor, not a lawyer. So
an OBGYN, yes.
Yes. And, Ron Paul never ran seriously. He ran as a point to kind of push, I guess a libertarian style philosophy into the Republican Party.
Yep, and he did admit that.
Yeah. But his son is much more different. His son is out to win. I mean, if you look how his son talks and acts and moves things, what he believes is kind of always up in the air. Sometimes he seems extremely conservative, especially on social issues. And other times that seems to fall away. I don't think he has a very core, set of values and principles that won't change over time. And that actually, I think, will help him. I don't think you get very far in most of these elections by having a rock solid set of principles that you will not bend on.
You never waver, right?
So I do think he will gain a little bit more in popularity as the weeks go on. I don't think he'll clinch the nomination because I don't think there's enough support for his style of, I don't want to call it radicalism because it's not, but he's a very hardliner when it comes to certain things and the way he talks about things. And you really can't do that and win your party's presidential nomination.
Who do you think should win, and who do you think will win on the Democrat side for, through the primary process and to eventually become the actual presidential candidate for the Democrats?
That's a really tough question. You are talking about a pool that is very small. There's less than 4 people that have announced that they're going to run, or that they have intention to run, that they're doing an exploratory committee. And Clinton's not one of them. She will. She will throw her hat into the ring. There's too much pressure on her now to do so.
Yeah, exactly. Most likely she will. And she is staffing up. There's just no doubt about that.
You have maybe 5, and you might get a 6th surprise candidate, but unless you have another Barack Obama coming out of the wings, and I don't think even if you did have another Barack Obama, people are going to believe him anymore. Came through in 2008 and spoke a different message than what the previous 3 or 4 presidents did before him, presidential candidates, that were running, did before him. He spoke about change and making things transparent and really caring about people and actually talking about minimizing the size of government and making it more lean and more effective.
Minimizing the size of government. Imagine
he talked about that. Yes, he did.
How often do you hear that? You almost never
do.
That.
And it wasn't necessarily cutting spending, but reducing spending in certain areas to shift to other areas that he felt was more appropriate. It was about leaning down government. He had a big thing in the 2008, 2007 up to the election. And since he got in office, obviously he's reneged on every single promise he made. Everything he stood for, he completely changed.
As always.
And you have to understand that it's not just him. I mean, every president does this. Part of it is that when they're running, they have no idea what it's like to sit in the hot seat. they talk a big game, but then they get there and they have some, they're talking about how we're going to close down Guantanamo, and then 12 generals walk into his room and go, yeah, you do this and this is what's going to happen. And he goes, oh, well, that's off the radar.
Yeah, go figure, right?
So I don't blame him necessarily. I just want to point out that these messages of change and stuff were really overemphasized with him, and he pushed it really hard. And then people in the 2012 election, you saw the doubt. There is no way that Mitt Romney should have even come close to even beating Obama in basically what amounts to a national popularity poll. I mean, let's be really honest. You're talking about a man who has 10 times the amount of charisma than a wet sock. I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
He's basically competing against a wet sock, and he barely won.
And really, that election got pretty nasty at times between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. So if this time in 2016, if it's Clinton and let's say, for example, Jeb Bush, will it get just as nasty?
It'll get worse, I believe, because you don't have a clear position of power. One was the incumbent. You have to remember that he stood as an incumbent. You have a higher risk of winning the election. Not a higher risk, but you have a higher chance of winning the election.
Sure.
And no matter what office you run, incumbents always take an advantage. Now you have neither of them has an advantage. And typically when you leave office, one party leaves office, they typically don't win it back. And especially in recent history, we've seen that. 1 or 2 times it's ever happened. One was Bush Sr., after Reagan's term, he was able to hold on to one more. But other than that, it really doesn't happen too often. Really, we're coming up on that now. Obviously, Hillary Clinton, regardless of what you feel about her personally, has the most clout of the Democratic Party. Whether she's strong-armed it or muscled it or done whatever she's done to earn it, she's earned it in the system that we call our two-party system. Now, obviously, if you want to say that system is flawed, then that's a good example. Hillary Clinton rising to the top of that pile should tell you that right now. I mean, Jeb Bush rising to the top of his pile should tell you that immediately, that there's something flawed going on around here. But she's going to win the nomination. There is no way she's going to lose that nomination. She has too much steam going out of it, unless she chooses not to run. Unless for something that comes out of her past that's worse than a mysterious staffer ending up getting killed and no one knowing what happened and it kind of getting buried, or some real estate investments of multi-million dollars somehow not getting taxes paid on them, or any other sort of email debacle. I mean, she's had so many things thrown in front of her. At this point, I think the only way that she would lose that nomination is if they found her in bed with a live boy or a dead girl. And that's what's going to take to derail her campaign. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you feel about her. It's not the same thing with the Republicans, though. The Republicans really do have Jeb Bush and Scott Walker.
Yeah, it's completely up in the air, and Marco Rubio seems to continue to make steam, and I mean, he might be a contender as well, and he is staffing up, which I think he just chose a former Mitt Romney staffer, in fact, to head his campaign.
That's probably a good move. Rubio, a lot of people like him because he's a very moderate Republican. He obviously comes from a very moderate state in Florida, in a very moderate district. But they also like him because he's not your traditional white Republican, which diffuses a lot of the, ammo that you have when you fire at somebody, especially a Republican. They typically is the party of old white men. And when you see a guy who's, in his early 40s, who's clearly Latino, and he's talking about these free market principles and other things, assuming that he's going to continue that spiel when he gets into president and not kowtow to the the conservative line. It tends to take away fire from the Democrats to fight against him. Though I will say that Hillary Clinton does have an advantage that the rest of them don't, and it is the fact that she is a woman running for office at a time when women's issues are on everybody's mind. You can't spend 30 seconds on Twitter or on LinkedIn without somebody mentioning something about women's rights. Now, not women's rights in other countries where they're actually being sold into slavery and they're having things done to them and they can't vote and really messed up stuff. We're talking about equal pay stuff and paternity leave or maternity leave type of stuff.
Emotional issues.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yes, we need to work on stuff, but I'm just being very specific about what type of issues we're talking about. And her winning the office would be seen as a justification, just like Obama winning the office was a justification that blacks can truly rise up in our society, which I'd argue you don't have to see a president rise up to see that, considering we've had numerous people in positions of incredible power do those things, CEOs of companies and stuff. But the presidency is a symbolic position. And I do think that Hillary Clinton does have an advantage there. She is a woman at a time when people are looking for a woman to assert to the presidency. We are the only country that hasn't had one practically in the Western world. So for president, obviously you need to pay attention to not just the two parties that are running, but what the primary system is, what that means. So in each party you have multiple candidates that run, and if you're part of the Democrats or the Republicans, you need to pay attention to who's running inside your racket first, because that'll determine who goes up to the top general election. Then you need to figure out issues. What does each candidate stand on each issue, and where do you stand? And then come voting day, figure out which one you want to go vote for, and head to the polls.
I like it. All right. Thank you, Alex. Our more lighthearted segment is next in 5-Minute Finance. Let's take a scenario. Let's say that you just came into a bit of money. Maybe you got a raise at work or a bonus or inheritance, whatever. You have $10,000 to do something with. And what do you do? What do you do with it? So do you spend it? Do you go out and buy or put a down payment on a car or a new house, or do you pay off debt? What do you do? Well, in my humble opinion, it's actually very easy. Take a look at your debts. And the idea is to pay off as many debts as you can as quickly as possible, because once you are debt free, you are completely flexible. You have so much more freedom at your hands, which comes after you're at a point where you're relatively financially independent. So the key is to pay down those debts as fast as you can. So when you get the sum of money, especially if it's unexpected, but even if you are expecting it, pay down your highest debts first. So if you have credit card debts with a high interest loan, you probably want to pay down those debts first. But let's say you don't have credit card debts. You are financially responsible enough to pay off your credit cards with every monthly bill, and you don't have to worry about that. So you have a mortgage and maybe a car payment. So take a look at your highest interest rate in whatever debt you happen to have, whether that's your mortgage from your house or a car loan or a loan for anything else. Take the highest interest and mesh that up against your average rate of return for your investments. Now, traditionally over the years in the stock market in general, that's been about 4%. So you should expect on average in the stock market about 4% every year rate of return. So if you have a debt out there with an interest rate that is greater than 4%, so 5, 6, 7%, pay that debt off first. rather than simply invest that money. Because if you do not pay that debt off first, you will be losing more with the interest of your debt than you will gain with the capital gains of your investments. That's my take. Alex, how do you view this issue?
I definitely recommend people do pay down debts, especially if it is over the excess of 4 to 5%. I mean, obviously, if you have 1.9% car loan or a 0% car loan, don't pay extra on it. You're actually getting paid in reality to have that loan. It kind of sounds weird, but it's true, just due to the rate of inflation. Though I would encourage people to put some money aside for a nest egg. To make sure you have a few months of living expenses saved up before you start to go pay loans. The reason being is that, yeah, you might pay a little bit more in the long run, but if you lose your job or if something happens, where your car completely breaks and you need that extra money or something like that, you don't go further into short-term debt and become a victim to payday loans or credit cards, which carry a very high interest on them. It's a good insurance policy to keep 2 or 3, maybe even 6 months, ultimately recommended, of salary saved in your savings account at all times.
Interesting. Okay, so you will actually leave debt on the table then if you do not have some means to maintain your lifestyle essentially for at least a few months if you were to lose your job.
Yeah, just very short term to prevent you from sliding back into debt. Because when you slide back into debt on these short-term loans, they're due much earlier, and they are much, much more expensive than if you went to, pay off your mortgage of your house, let's say 3 years early. Yes, you're going to save more money in the long run that way, but it's the risk is if you fall into a short-term problem that only lasts 3 or 4 months, you can financially ruin yourself forever. You could literally have to foreclose on your home or do other things like that, and that's much more damaging to you than spending a few $1,000s extra over the course of several years.
Sure. And finances can be tough. Keeping track of everything and keeping it all organized and getting keeping your eye really on the ball here can be pretty tough. There are tools out there that I like to use beyond just a simple Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, which actually is quite powerful if you're an Excel whiz. But there are tools online. For example, Mint happens to be one of the more popular tools. I personally use Mint. I like it a lot. It's not a budgeting application, but it does help you keep track of your net worth pretty easily, and it allows you to keep a pretty close eye on exactly where your money's going. Everything is categorized. So spending, if you spend on groceries, it's categorized for groceries. If you go out to a movie, it's categorized under entertainment. Those kinds of things. So at the end of your month, you know exactly where all your money is going, and maybe you're overspending on one category or the other. There are alternatives. There's Personal Capital, which is another online resource that helps you do this kind of budgeting. And it creates this visibility, I guess, into your monthly expenses, so you know exactly where each dollar that you spend is going. Alex, do you use Mint, or do you have another tool that you like to use better that helps you keep track of where your finances are going?
So I do use Mint as well. I use TurboTax and Intuit, and so it all kind of fits together. But I also urge people to look at creditkarma.com. It's a way to monitor your credit and look at loans and outstanding things that you have. It's more focused on your credit as opposed to your budget, which is important, though. You need to pay attention to your credit, especially when we're talking about paying back debt and loans and what that will do to your credit. That's
very true. Yep, that's very true.
And then ultimately, there's another tool out there called Undebt. So to get you out of debt, it's the site, and I'll link it in the blog. That it's for personal debt management, and this focuses, unlike on Mint, which is your budget, this focuses exclusively on your debt, and it provides you with a path to repay that debt and get out of debt. With different parameters you can set it aggressively or reasonably or lightly. During lean times or during times of plenty, you can adjust that, and it's a very good tool for people who especially have difficulty trying to stick to a budget.
All right, guys, our last segment for Fools for Thought. Back to politics. What if there were no political parties?
What if this is as good as it gets? What if this is as good as it gets?
So what do we do when we go to the voting booths and we don't have an R or a D or an L next to these candidates' names? I mean, obviously the big name candidates like Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush, most people would know their political affiliations. But really, what is the political party system doing to our country, and how does it affect the way that we vote? Alex, what's your take on this?
I think aside from not seeing a DRNR and just blind voting for people that you don't know what they represent in reality, because just because you're from a political party doesn't mean you actually support what that political party supports. The other thing I think we'd gain is if you don't have parties and parties aren't in the system, you effectively don't have districts in gerrymandering. So, everybody in Arizona would vote for everybody that's running from Arizona. You wouldn't have all these weird districts that stretch halfway across the state, or, in New York where they district things out by race and neighborhood, to try to proportional. And I think that would be a big benefit to voting. People would start to see their preferences more and not have to do the whole lesser of two evils. They could vote for who they wanted to and have actually a decent chance of this person at least getting elected as one of the lower seats.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a good point about districts. With how politicians run redistricting, districts are effectively designed around the popularity of these candidates. So we've put together a system where it's almost impossible for a lot of these big name politicians to lose, simply because their districts are designed around them, around their constituency. So it's almost impossible to vote some of these people out. I mean, when you look at politicians like Barbara Boxer in California or really anywhere, when districts are involved, you almost never have much of a choice, and that's a key to, I think, where we're headed as a country here, where we see some of the same parties in office every single election cycle.
The other thing I think where we pick up some benefit would be in ideology. People oftentimes now do it's us or them. My way or the highway, absolutism. The Democrats are always wrong or the Republicans are always wrong. And that mentality is Al-Qaeda. That's how Al-Qaeda thinks. That's how Nazi Germany thinks. That's how fascists think. There is no concept of, gray space or compromise, which is a democratic process, which is how we were founded. Most of our history shows that compromises have been made. Even about very absolutist issues, even slavery was a compromise. So we have this system that's set up to enforce that with the political parties, because all you ever see is DNR, blue and red, fighting each other, against each other, all the time. And if you're for gun control but against abortion, what do you do? Where are you at as a voter? If you're for limited government,
right,
but you really want to have people that can do whatever they want, you don't care about their sex life or their orientation, what do you do then? If you're not,
it really comes down to what the
religious-
most important issue to you happens to be.
But then you're taking on all these other issues with you. So if let's say that you're a public school teacher and you want to have more votes for the public school, but you happen to be conservative and socially, and you don't support abortion, federal funds towards abortion, right? What do you do? If you're somebody who likes and enjoys shooting guns and stuff like that, but you really do feel the poor need a handout, what do you do? I'm saying is that a lot of people are forced into voting for things that they know are evil, and they justify it by I have no other choice. But is that really what it is, or is that a system that's been designed to give them that choice, to make sure that they're divided and that they prevent from breaking away from the party, essentially, away from the mainstream thought? So the party goes, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're controlled, these are the 5 hot topics that we're going to present in all of our elections, and you're either with us or against us. And they do that. I mean, they really do. We spend $1 billion on the presidency every time an election happens. You don't tell me that you don't have some smart people running numbers?
Let's pretend in 2016 we have no more political parties. Usually debates run between candidates of different parties. Our ballots are divided up into their different political parties. What happens to our political landscape and the way that this entire process runs if there's no longer a concept of political party?
I'm not even sure that people would be able to function, to be honest with you. It's from the districting issue all the way down to the platform issues. You'd have candidates that, would have to find their own path. They'd have to be able to push out a message that would be acceptable to everybody. And it's hard to do that when, you can't just say DNR, and that's what you're going to vote for. These are the general things we believe, move on. They would have to actually do a lot of research and actually look at things. You'd probably see voter participation rates plummet, because people would actually have to go to the polls and understand what they're voting for. You'd also see a lot of unintended consequences. Somebody would think that somebody's for something, but they would not be, and they'd vote that way just because they heard their name in the news. And they do this now with hearing somebody's party affiliation, then doing it and turning out that they don't really support that. So you'd still see some of that. I really do think overall, though, our costs of our elections would be less, because you wouldn't have these giant RNC, DNC parties that spend $1 billion for the presidency. You wouldn't have that type of cohesion.
Their conventions, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But you would see more coalitions. You would see smaller groups form that are unofficial.
Yes. Yes, but around issues, not around parties.
Correct. It'd be around issues, not ideals. So you would have to build a broad base. So everything would have to become more moderate. There'd be no way for anybody to become an extremist at all in anything because you would have to gain enough popularity with other individuals over these issues in order to pass them through. Otherwise, you couldn't do a party line vote because there's no party line. So
yeah, it really is a sad state of affairs in this country where it becomes harder to do your voting duty to participate in this process when you have to vote for a person rather than a party. I guess it's just much too easy, in my opinion. I think in yours as well. When you just vote down party lines, you simply look for the correct letter next to these candidates' names, and you're done. It's easy. These guys are Democrats. They probably believe, I'm a Democrat too, so they automatically are the best candidate for it. But when you throw that out, when you don't give people the convenience of looking for that letter next to their names on these ballots, and you force people to actually know the issues, I think you're right. I think we will have a problem in voter participation even more than we do today. I don't necessarily know what kind of effect that would have on our leadership. But to be perfectly honest, I am willing to give it a try. I know it would never happen. There's no way we would ever get rid of political parties in this country, but I would love to see it happen.
The one major benefit of removing political parties and political party affiliation is you actually get more representation from different people who wouldn't normally appear on the ballot. So for everyone who's, doesn't happen to fall specifically in at the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, Constitution Party, all these guys would actually get on ballots and actually be able to be voted for. You wouldn't be able to exclude them from the ballot lists. You wouldn't be able to exclude them from the debates. You wouldn't be able to exclude them out of the media. So you would have more voices, number one, to be voicing things, which is always good. You always want more discussion and dialogue in politics.
Sure.
But the other thing, and the thing that really is kind of almost evil, is that you wouldn't have as much trying to exclude people from voting to begin with. So both parties do this too, not just one, and I don't care if one does it more or less than the other, they both still do it. They go to extreme lengths in order to prevent certain members from voting. And they do it by passing different laws and different ID requirements and different ways that people can vote. And sometimes they'll do it the other way, where they'll make it really easy for a particular type of people in an area to vote. By relaxing the rules on the voter ID, or relaxing the rules on how they can vote, or setting up more polling stations in certain areas that are heavily towards their party. They do a lot of this manipulation stuff in
it's
order
very
to
clever,
deny.
in fact.
It is, and that's what the real danger is that people from these two parties, and that's most of America, think it's okay when their own party's doing it, but when the other party does it, that's dangerous. And when they're caught red-handed, in a scandal or anything, well, it's okay because we're still not as bad as them. That is the dangerous mentality. When you remove that, you suddenly don't get an us versus them mentality, and people can vote more freely. They actually have more representation, and they aren't as discriminated against in their vote, because there's no way to predict how you're going to vote. They can target you by demographic, but they really can't target you such a broad platform, because somebody who's might be black in New York might have nothing in common with somebody who's black in Los Angeles under this new system, where not the party just shares like down the straight line, and that's what I think is a disservice. I think you see a lot of young black Republicans who get marginalized by, because they're told that they're dirty, they're somehow a race traitor or something like that, when that they're not clearly at all. They simply just were raised in an area where those values are where they're at. And it is a sad state of affairs. Again, you don't have to be a part of any one of the parties. You can be independent and see this. But at the end of the day, it's going to take people in the parties to turn around and go, you know what, this is getting ridiculous. And I don't think people are willing to do that because they'd rather feel right than do right.
So what percentage of people do you think, Alex, vote straight down party lines?
Depending on election, because I know during presidential elections we get more people out and voting. Something like a third of the populace votes on presidential elections versus like 20% on off years. So during those years, I'm going to bet that the voting down the straight party ticket is like 85%.
Pretty high, yeah.
I'm going to bet. I mean, and when I say voting straight down the party ticket, I mean they'll vote only one way or the other, with maybe one or two that might go to some other party just because either that's the only person that's running for it, or it's a local office and they know the person. And despite the fact they carry that dirty D or that dirty R in front of their name, they still will vote for them because they have had that barrier broken. They're now people to them. They're not just a D or an R. So I'm going to bet 85% or so during a presidential election years. Off years, I'm going to wager that the number drops a little bit to like 70, 75% when you have more independents that are in the mix. See, the problem isn't just that people vote, and then they vote for these parties, right? It's the fact that it's block voting. So it creates a sort of mass by the masses voting of hysteria, as opposed to individuals thinking with their brain and actually voting, right? They'll go into these areas, and when I mean the political parties, will go into these areas. Think of it as backwoods, Oklahoma, and poor slums in New York. Right? Those two areas. And they'll go through there and they'll go door to door knocking on people's things. And they'll essentially give them things. Whether it's not money outright or other things, they will pay them essentially for their time. And they'll talk to you about how good it is for this party and what this party is doing for you and why you should vote for them. But what they really are saying at the end of the day is if you vote for the other guys, or if you don't vote, they'll come and take everything you have away from you. And obviously we could all, say, oh, the gays will come and destroy everything you have, or, the other ones will come and take everything that you have, all the checks that you get in the mail and all the assistance that you get. They target, and obviously I'm mentioning two parties and their very known political tactics that they do in these areas. But they'll also go to union areas and they'll tell them that without voting for this party, the union wouldn't exist, therefore they wouldn't have a job. They'll go to other areas and they'll scare them of, brown people are going to come take your jobs. They employ hate and ignorance in a lot of their policies. Both parties do it, and they do it indiscriminately. In fact, they do it to such a point that they were getting called on in the 2012 election. Both parties calling people up, threatening them if they didn't vote. Obama had a very sophisticated setup where he ran numbers and statistics, not him, is obviously his advisors, to figure out who would be the least likely to vote inside these voting blocks, and they harassed the living crap out of them. I mean, it was one of the most well-done big data systems that's ever been tested in a political arena, and that helped him get reelected. He outspent Mitt Romney by like $280 million doing the system.
There were no political parties, and the influence of the wealthy over our nation's politics would sink. I mean, the effect of soft money would be so low that we would no longer see elections effectively being bought and paid for by highly funded influencers.
At the end of the day, I think the political parties are a manifestation of the wealthy and the powerful's way to control knowing that behavior exists. I mean, I'm not saying they're sitting around a room full of smoking mirror, and going, we can control the people.
Conspiracy.
No. It's just that they want to stay in office, and this is how they get to stay in office. And
exactly.
So they're just doing it.
They are looking out for number one.
Absolutely. And they want to do good. I think a lot of these people in office want to do good, and they justify to themselves, how can I do good if I'm not in office? The other people are doing it, so I have to do it. So let's try to control these people for their best interests. We're looking out for their best interest. Sure. They don't know enough. They are ignorant compared to us. We see the big picture, therefore we can tell them what to do.
All right, guys, we have run out of time, but what do you think? Let us know on our website. It is foolsforthought.com. What if there were no political parties? How do you think that would influence our political landscape? Would it affect your ability or willingness to get out there and vote for the person you believe is best for this country? That is it. Thank you guys for listening. We gave you a preview of the 2016 elections from both the Democrat and Republican sides. We talked a little bit about key Senate and governor races. We talked about finances, about what is the smartest way to invest or use a bit of money that you just came into unexpectedly, whether a salary increase or bonus or inheritance or whatever. And lastly, we lamented our two-party system, which quite effectively has just become a one-party system. But that is it. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate your ear, and we will see you next time. Adios.